once all that's out of the way, then I should be able to. PM, it's only about 15 psi. Alright guys, I'm walking up to my 1988 Caprice and I want to share with you a small issue that I've been having with it. I've been having an issue with the oil pressure not being horrible, but not being as good as I'd like it to be. Starting this thing up, the oil pressure is just okay. It took longer than I feel like it should have climbed to. You know, for cold at 1,000 RPM, I don't feel like this is a super fantastic oil pressure. To be completely honest, you'll see when it gets warmed up at idle at about 700 RPM, it's only about 15 psi, which isn't great. So I am gonna drive it real quick. Got a stop I need to make on my way over to the house. So what I'm gonna be doing today is putting a new oil pump in this car. It's gonna be quite a bit of work. I'm putting a new high volume pump in it, and I'm going to inspect the pan gasket because all the oil pressure goes through the fan, through the oil pan, to the filter, and then comes back into the engine. It's kind of a weird, it's a super weird design actually. Standard LS, but it seems like a lot of going through different potential leak points to me to make the oil pressure, but I guess it works. So I'm running to actually making a stop to get some oil, and what I'm going to do is pull the radiator. The water pump has to come off. The air conditioning bracket has to kind of come off and swing out of the way. The oil pan has to be let down. The timing cover has to come off. And then once all that's out of the way, then I should be able to pull the bolts out of the pickup tube, pull the oil pump off, put the new oil pump on. There's a lot of debate on the internet about what the best oil pump to use is. I went with a generic, like eBay stock replacement LS oil pump. The equivalent part number would have been M295, I think, for the Melling version. Mine is not a Melling, but I got initially. And my oil pressure has kind of slowly come down over time. I don't know if that's due to the pump wearing in, or if it's due to a camshaft, this is swinging obnoxiously. If it's due to a camshaft bearing that's not super happy with the new cam. Honestly, not sure what it's all about. So what I'm going to be doing is, I have a Melling 355 oil pump, which is basically their stock replacement for a engine that had VVT in it. I did a bunch of reading. There's debate online about if it's safe to run that pump in a non-VVT motor. There were a few reports of people claiming that you can run the oil pan dry with that pump. I don't really believe that. I couldn't find a single person who said that they had seen it run the oil pan dry. I saw some people say that the stock F-body oil pans were a bad design, and on a drag strip pass wouldn't maintain decent oil pressure regardless of what pump you used. But I couldn't find anyone who specifically said they knew they had ran their pan dry with the M355 or another VVT spec, VVT active fuel management spec oil pan. So I'm going to put that on the car. I'm probably going to fire it up without the water pump and everything on it, and just hope that, just run it for like a minute or two and see what my oil pressure looks like rather than put the whole thing all the way back together. I'm interested to see what it will look like. I tend to think that more oil pressure is better than less. My oil pressure seems to have stabilized with the idle with 15W40 in the car now, with idle around 15 psi, and at like 3,500 RPM I have about 3,000, or at about 3,500 RPM I have about 30 psi. So it's just barely what I would consider adequate. The high RPM oil pressure, probably not horrible, probably pretty decent. These LS motors don't really need the crazy high oil pressure, even for performance applications that older small blocks tend to run. But from what I've read, but I would rather see more oil pressure than less. I'm hoping to end up with 30 to 40 psi at a warm idle, and I'd be fine if it had 75 psi cruising at 3,000 RPM. I'd love that, actually. Cheapest place I found to buy oil and automotive fluids. This is why I shop at Walmart. Full synthetic, 5 quarts for less than 20 bucks. Now, if you've watched any Project Farm videos or anything, you'll know that Walmart's oil is actually pretty decent. He did Super Tech and Amazon Basics. He had them lab compared and stuff. And is it as good as like the Mobile One? Probably not quite. Is it better than anything that was offered 20 years ago? Probably. So I'm just gonna go ahead and I'm gonna run the Walmart stuff in my car. Got a belt squeak that I think is this idler. I don't know if I think it's actually the belt, not the idler itself. I think the belt is somehow slipping on the idler. I think the idler is the problem and the belt is slipping on it. Step 1 today in pursuit of better oil pressure, motor flush. The internet has a surprising amount of people who say that this solved their LS oil pressure problems. Possibly that there was some sort of intermittent blockage of some type, or possibly that the oil pressure sensor or a screen that I don't think I have below it is plugged. So I'm going to pour this in, let it idle for about 5 minutes, which is what it says to do. Ooh. It's very thin. Thinner than I thought it would be. It makes sense. So this clock said 8:02 when I started the car, so I'm gonna go till 8:08 and we'll call that just over 5 minutes. Oil pressure hasn't really changed since putting that stuff in. I don't want to rev too much with it in the car. So yeah, we'll give it a few more minutes just to idle here. I have no fear of this thing overheating, so we'll just see what happens. All right, so I left this thing idle for a few minutes with the motor flush in it. And now, basically, I just got to get started tearing it apart. I'm going to pull the intake off. Radiator's going to come out. Water pump's got to come off. At least part of this bracket has to come off. Maybe not the whole thing. Probably not the whole thing. Water pump has to get out of the way, though. Timing cover's got to get out of the way. And I'm going to have to drop the oil pan. So I'm going to get the car up on some jack stands and start zipping stuff off of it. All right, so about 15 minutes later, I got the radiator out, water pump off. AC bracket's not actually gonna have to go anywhere, which is honestly awesome. I made a little bit of a mess and I washed it down with some water. So I'm probably gonna take a break here while that dries a little bit. I'm gonna pull the harmonic balancer and work on getting the timing pan off, the timing cover off. All right, I got this thing back together and running. It's good. I think I fixed the belt noise problem I was having too. I sanded on the idler while it was running. We have much more satisfactory oil pressure. It's been running for almost 10 minutes now and it's still that high. I feel good about it. Alright guys, I am now driving the car. You can tell my hair is fantastic today. It now has killer oil pressure. The car's been idling. Well, I just started it again. I had it shut off for about 10 minutes, but before that I had it idling for like 20 plus minutes. Oil pressure is about 40 at idle now, hot. I haven't gotten on the freeway yet, but it seems like it's probably going to be 50, 55 cruising, which is, to me, that's perfect. It's higher than an LS probably needs to be, but I would rather be a good amount higher than be on the very, very low end of what's acceptable. I feel like the problem is probably that my cam bearings are shot. I put the new cam in this thing. I looked at the bearings and there was a little bit of wear, which is super, super common. And I decided, close my eyes and put it together anyway, which is also a very common thing for people to do with an LS. So my bearing clearances were on the slightly larger side of factory spec. I replaced all the main bearings and rod bearings. And I plasti gauged everything. Everything was on the big side of factory spec. Not like super big side, just, you know, not some of them were right in the middle, some of them were a little bigger. I would have obviously preferred them all be super tight, but that's probably not realistic with a 160,000 mile crank. That I don't know how well it was taken care of. So I've got it all back together. Great oil pressure now. I'm running the high volume compared to stock pump, but it's really not crazy high volume in my opinion. It's not crazy high volume. It is more than the vast majority of LSs probably need, because they probably have, when you put it together, they probably have good bearing clearances. And if you change the cam, most of you who are building something serious probably put good cam bearings in it. I didn't do that. This was a budget at home in the garage build, so I didn't do that. I did put the main bearings in. I probably didn't even need to. I probably should have just left everything factory on the bottom end, and just threw the cam in and just started with a high volume oil pump. I did a bunch of reading. The internet is super divided. Some people love the high volume stuff, some people hate it. There's two different high volume pumps. There's one that's 18% more. This one is actually the factory pump for engine that has displacement on demand, or VVT, and it is like super high volume, 33% more volume. I decided if I was as worn out as I seem to be, more volume was probably in my best interest, especially since the cam bearings in the factory blocks get the oil first, right? So if you have worn out cam bearings, your main bearings are going to suffer oil pressure for it. If you have direct main oiling, then you're great, because the main bearings get oil first, and then the cam bearings get oil. And the cam bearings, you need them, but they don't need as much oil to flow. There is pressure on the cam, but it's not like the cam is having the piston pressed down against it all the time. There, I got on it a little bit for you guys. Seems to be doing great. Doing 50 in third gear, fourth gear. I've got 55 miles an hour, 47 psi oil pressure. Turn the camera around so you guys can see where we're going. Cold start this morning at 50 psi of oil pressure. Definitely a lot happier with that.